So I'm meaning to do a talk or actually write an article for some time about the various experiences that I've had while I was active in the UK. I've been thinking of maybe writing a small, short kind of set of articles, maybe a book at some point, but I just be kicking in the long grass because busy and bored. But anyway, and lazy, sorry, not bored. Anyway, so what I wanted to talk about is something that I found interesting, and it might be interesting to those people, like the small niche of people that are interested in kind of the lie of the land of Muslims in the UK, and how the various groups are, what's the inside dealing with them, and my interactions with them, my interactions as an activist with all these various groups and people and individuals. And I was active for many years, maybe 20 years, and so I met loads of people. I mean, whether it's Tariq Ramadan, Zakir Naik, who me and him had a massive ding dong when we met, or whether it's groups like Cage or HT or ISB or Tablighi Jamaat or the Brelwis or the Salafis. Each one has a different flavour, and I interacted with all of them, and I've got some funny, interesting stories with some of them, right? So I thought I might as well just talk about my interactions with each group, maybe in a series of videos, right? And so I'll start off with HT, right? It's hard to talk about any group without people getting triggered, and I get that, and I don't mind if you are triggered about it. I'm not trying to offend anyone, particularly. I'm not. You're gonna have to apologise about my hair, because I haven't been to the hairdressers for like 50 years. Apologise for to the people who might get offended by this. I'm not trying to dig at anyone in particular. It's my personal interaction, my personal opinion about that particular group, right? You may agree, you may disagree, and that's cool. Not everyone agrees about everything. And that particular group back in, and my memory's so bad, I don't remember if it was late 80s or mid 90s, to be honest. But at some point, they just came on the scene, and they were massive, and they just kept growing, yeah. And they had this amazing ability to interact and get on board fairly intelligent Muslims, kind of university grads type thing, and then completely indoctrinate them, brainwash them, educate them, depending on whose side you are, right? And make them really passionate in their belief system, which always amazed me. I was never myself able to do that with my own team. Generally, I mean, a few of us were the hardcore guys that worked with me. They were like me, right? They were hardcore, and they didn't really care about anyone else's opinion. But most people that were part of Impact, remember, all volunteers who didn't stick around, for the full length, weren't the inner core. They weren't as strong as what I found the HT guys were. HT guys didn't mind being unpopular. They didn't mind fighting everyone out there and defeating them. Whereas a lot of volunteers who joined Impact, they joined to feel good, to do some good. But if they became unpopular, if some of their friends or their parents said, "Oh, Impact's doing something that's a bit unpopular," and remember, we were there to make change. So our design, our whole modus operandi was criticism of the current status quo. So you were going to be unpopular because the status quo was going to go against you. What I found with a lot of our guys is they just couldn't cope with it, and they would leave, because their uncles, said bad, their friends had negative opinion about Impact. So that because they didn't have the inner belief of what of what we were doing, they didn't really buy into it, didn't believe it. They just were rubbish, and they couldn't cope with criticism, and they left. I remember this one incident with HT guy. He came out of a mosque, and I don't know, about 5 or 6 guys around him arguing with him, and I watched. Now remember, I'm not with HT. I was in my time probably at some point the biggest critic of HT in or at least one of the top few critics of HT, most well-known critics of HT, most debated about critics of HT in England. But I couldn't help stand back and admire this HT guy. It came out of the mosque, and he was just taking all of them on. And I thought to myself, that level of confidence in your belief system, that you don't care what anyone says, you're not scared, you're not worried, you don't care that these people don't agree with you. You're confident in what you're saying, and you will argue your case. Yeah. And I couldn't help but admire that. And they had this ability of doing that type of training or indoctrination on a mass scale. I never cracked it how. Because I was never a member of any of these groups. I never worked out how these guys actually do that kind of mass indoctrination and make so many people believe so hardcore about a belief system. For me, when I'm arguing a case, I'm arguing from reason and ration. I don't know what they were doing with these guys, because reason for most Muslims doesn't mean much. They have to believe that Allah told them from heaven type thing, and you have to switch part of their reasonable brain off to make them really understand anything or do anything. Anyway, I'm confusing myself, but anyway, in effect, I wasn't able to do that, and credit due to HT, they were able to do it, and they did a pretty amazing job in that. What I was able to do was early on, because they remember these guys came about and they were knocking out all oncomers. They had a belief, they argued their belief, and they believed in their belief, right? They argued their belief very articulately. ISB was demolished. Now ISB and MAB were the kind of big groups when I was growing up, but when HT came about, I think before that the Salafis started to grow and become a big force. But at some point, whenever HT kind of exploded onto the scene, they demolished ISB. ISB didn't have an answer at all. They just shrank. I'm not surprised. I'll do a talk on ISB. I was so useless, but they just got demolished. MAB, I didn't know much about MAB, but there were people in my school, when I was a young kid who were part of those guys, and they were finished. They couldn't stand up to HT. Later on, I found out how rubbish MAB were as well. But again, don't get triggered. Hear me out, and then I'll tell you. But they were just useless. But anyway, so these guys didn't have much of competition, and I think the biggest people they were fighting at the time, or knocking out, was the Salafis. And Salafis that time were hardcore Salafis, like flipping nutcase. They weren't like Salafis of today, were just more reasonable, got a bit more argument to them, a bit more. I don't know, Sheikh Haytham, I think, might have made a big difference to that ideology or that group, because now you can actually meet Salafis who actually got a bit of a brain. But those days, brains weren't, it was the letter of the law says this, that's it. And the very tunnel vision, very aggressive, very, in your face about everything. The Salafis, when they were like HT, in their time, they were on a war path. They wanted to defeat all oncomers. And they did, but I don't want to go into Salafis. I'll do another talk about Salafis, right? But they were a confident group. But Salafis were more confident HT was more confident than Salafis. They kicked the living daylights out of Salafis, right? In most college campuses and debates, and I'm talking about in a debate, I don't mean physical fighting, right? In debates, for the masses' mind, they were winning most debates. Anyway, so when I came about, I was able to reach thousands and thousands of people, not because I was an amazing guy, but I clocked the internet, gave me a bit, and through that I was able to reach a massive amount of people. And my primary thing was just get Muslims active to defend their rights in the UK, because I could see that what you are seeing now is what I saw. I don't say the Dylan that is seeing right now. I mean, the clever guys probably saw it before as well, but a lot of Muslim thickos are actually experiencing now. Some of the intelligent guys saw 20 years ago, 30 years ago, and I was one of those guys, because I'm obviously a clever guy, right? So what I said is we need to get active, we need to defend ourselves, right? So what happens was HT was a primary blocker of that, because their whole belief system was any practical stuff that you did was pretty pointless, right? Because they said, well, what's the point of that? What's that going to achieve? That doesn't deliver Palestine to us. That was these lovely lines, right? Vote today, burn in hell tomorrow type thing, right? And Muslims being thick, they like these lines. They like these kind of simple sound bites. Muslims are not an intelligent community. Remember, we're generally an uneducated community. And even the educated amongst us come from an uneducated background. So we don't have third, fourth generation educated people. So we're just learning education. And most people who are university grads, their parents will not be university grads, and so they learn the most basic concepts from university of how to be a doctor or how to be a whatever, and they know their field, but actually thinking, reason, they don't have a background of that. Their parents aren't thinkers, and so the Haiti didn't have a real intellectual challenge to come up with. They had other thickos like Salafis to challenge. And I'm talking about thicko Salafis back then. I'm not talking about how thick the Salafis are now. I don't really know how thick or clever they are. I'll talk a bit about the Salafis in another talk, right? In today's, I've met some clever Salafis, not so long ago. It makes me think maybe they've mended their ways and started to read a book or something. So there are some intelligent Salafis now coming out and about, and thank God for that. But anyway, I don't want to digress about Salafis, right? So what I clocked early on with these Salafi, with these HT boys, was that they were taught by rote, i.e. they knew the standard set of arguments and they just followed it. And if you went outside of that set of arguments, you could knock the living daylights out of them. Now, that weren't easy because, these guys had a very comprehensive way of arguing. They had, 10, 20 ways of debating. They weren't like Salafis. Salafis are very one-track-minded way of debating. Whereas HT had a better educational system, right? Better indoctrination system. And they you couldn't just outwit them with 1 point, because they had about 5, 10 points. They could come out with enough. So, but as long as you clocked those 10 points and you had answers for that, then they were finished. They didn't know how to cope with something new. And all of them were taught the same way. So, often, HT guys come and argue with me, and it's a bit boring because, remember, you've been in the game for like 20 years, 30 years. Oh my God, and it's the same stuff. And it's a new guy who's learned the new stuff and he's full of beans. He wants to argue with you, but he doesn't know that, dude, I've argued the same thing with your mate 20 years ago. And it's flipping, it's the same stuff. It's mind-numbingly boring after a while, but they don't get that because he's obviously new and he's only 18 and he's got something, he wants to have a go at someone because he feels he's like king of the world. And after a while, it's just really boring. But by learning that they had this kind of set of arguments, what you could do is you could then go on the offensive and you could really hammer these guys. And they had, I've got to thank them, in fact, for making me, pseudo, initially, those guys, famous. And the reason was this. I clocked that if I attacked HT, what's the fact, to be fair, it was any group, right? But HT was a massive group, so it got out more, those days, So when I attacked HT, it would go around all the HT circles, and it would also go around all the people that hated HT. So I wasn't like the other guys, I wasn't like a bit timid or a bit kind of I would go full on and take HT on, right? And so what would happen was these guys, the HT guys would forward it and go, oh, check this tosser out. Look what he's saying about us, right? So no, there were tens of thousands of members. All of a sudden, what I'm saying is going around their houses. And then everyone who hated HT would go, oh, check what this guy's saying, this champion of, or this tosser who hates HT out, because they needed arguments. They wanted to take on HT. They were getting knocked out and they wanted to get defeated. And they wanted HT to be defeated. And so I use this very simple tactic to really get our message out. And it was brilliant in this way. And I remember meeting one of the top, they claimed that he was the head or the deputy head of HT. I can't remember his name now. Whether he was or not, remember, HT is a bit of a secretive group. You never know who you're really dealing with there, right? But I remember him coming and us meeting in a cafe in Ilford. And he had this big, thick book, kind of political science book. I remember thinking, whoa, this, it's a bit of a meaty read. Whether that was his kind of psychological trick to intimidate the opposition, I don't really know. But I remember sitting with him and I thanked him. I said, dude, I got to thank you. And he was like, he was there to meet me, basically to shut me up in some way, shape or form, whether to be nice to me and go, look, chill out, you don't need to attack HT, or whether to debate me and make me realise that, you know, my argument was wrong, but in effect make me stop attacking HT. And in that thing, just an interesting anecdote, I let him know. I said, look, dude, you guys are the best thing that ever happened to me. And he was like, why? I said, look, I couldn't convince Muslims to vote. Not because it's not rational or logical or anything, right? Any real reasonable reason. It's because it's boring. Muslims want to talk about jinns or, you know, theological debates like is Allah in heaven or is he all around us? They love that stuff. But ask them to vote tactically or strategically in England. That was nothing to do with Islam. In their mind, it was nothing to do with Islam. And so therefore, as soon as you went into that, you were talking to 0.0000001% of the then Muslim population. They just did not care and they did not understand. And it wasn't a topic of, it was like talking about, I don't know, paint drying, you know, or, you know, the ingredients of the perfect soil composition to someone who's not interested in farming. You know, just what are you talking to me about? I'll listen to you out of politeness, but I don't really care. That's how difficult it was to get Muslims to think tactically when it came to electing their MP. So it was a zero game. I could not win that game. And I'd read a book called They Dare to Speak Out, which probably, you know, no Muslim has read out, or one or two Muslims have read out there. But it basically was the only book that did a step-by-step tactic of how Jewish Zionists had basically dominated the game in the UK and America. And I just remember it exploding my mind, thinking it's so simple. Just get organised and do simple steps, and you can make massive differences. I know Muslims don't believe me, they're thick. Just don't argue with me about this stuff. Read the book, then come and talk to me, right? You're vexing me up just thinking about it. But anyway, so I thought if Zionists can get tactical like that, we could get tactical. But I couldn't convince Muslims to do this tactics because they were bored of it. They were thick. They didn't get it. Their whole Islamic education was, you know, what foot to enter the toilet with. When I was talking about voting tactically, and that was Islamic, they was like, what are you talking about, mate? But HT changed that for me because HT was anti-voting. It was a blunder of epic proportions for HT. It was the dumbest thing HT could ever do, right? And they did it. They fell right into the trap that I laid for them. What happened was, HT is all about Khilafah. That's their whole thing. They always go Khilafah, 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 right? But they also have these kind of secondary and third kind of arguments. I don't even understand why they put that in because it was so dumb. And one of those theological belief systems that they have was that voting was a sin. It was actually haram to vote. And they made it Islamic not to vote. And because they were a big thing on the scene and loads of people were talking about them and they were everywhere, outside every mosque and delivering leaflets and debating in the colleges, they were a big thing. They made voting a thing. And by challenging that, they made anti-voting a thing. I made voting a thing. I made something that I could never possibly have dreamed of come to life because I started to have arguments, generate heat, excitement, dynamism around the issue of voting. So I could never have got voting on the Muslim map, on the mind, unless HT had screwed it up monumentally and allowed me to get into ding-dongs with them. And by arguing with me, what happens in an argument? I go, voting's haram. They go, no, voting's not haram. They go, it's haram. And all of a sudden, 10 people now want to know what's going on. Is it haram? Isn't it haram? Whereas if they didn't exist and I said, come on guys, vote, everyone would go, yeah, all right, mate, let's go to that talk on jinn. You see, they defeated themselves and I was just smart enough to see how they could help me deliver what I needed to do to the Muslim mind. And that I'm just telling you that because it's a fascinating story. There's so much more to it. And so much more I could talk to you about this group, but really that's just a fascinating story and how I ended up I say obviously it was me and my guys, right? Ended up getting that message to thousands upon thousands upon thousands of people in the UK, culminating in that we were the first group that defeated a MP based on a Muslim bloc vote. No other group in the history of Britain has achieved that. We achieved it, right? And that was many years later, right? But it all started with us outsmarting HT on this this intellectual point. We made it an issue of arguing with HT because we knew only by arguing with HT would this issue that we wanted to make to showcase, to grandstand, would it become an issue in the Muslim mind. And HT fell right into our trap, and we made that political the raising of the political consciousness of the Muslim mind on this tactical point of, should we vote for a pro-Israel MP or not, based on the opposition that HT gave to us. Now, if HT just abandoned that, if they just said, drop it, let's not just talk about voting, the amount of young Muslims that voted was almost zero. Their dads voted, but their dads were never going to be HT. But the young population didn't, and they screwed it up for themselves by making it an issue. And they haven't learnt that to this day. That's my call. I know you HT guys might disagree. We can get onto loads of ding-dongs about it, but that's what one of my experiences, at least from my time. And I'll do another talk. Maybe I'll do the next talk on Cage when I do my next video cast.